Hi, good morning, everyone. Uh, so I'll just quickly give you an overview of what we have seen till now, right? We began with Sandeep and Arijit uh, talking about some of the critical kind of systems that need to be looked at the very onset when we start thinking about cities and how we start to organize cities. Then we looked at a presentation on forms of different cities and historically how those forms have actually played. We did a fairly extensive look at Edmund Bacon's sort of ideas of how cities are made and how you can learn from older cities to make new cities. We looked at Kevin Lynch's sort of observations coming from the 1960s and the kind of in many ways a response to the Siam kind of discourses as well, and a need to look at need to carefully look at what people living in the cities are actually saying about or expressing about their own cities. And then last week we saw Aditya who was speaking about Amos Rappaport and his methods of perception and cognition. Okay, this week what we are going to do is a little bit of a little bit of a history history kind of a lecture, as well as giving some insights on how grand kind of approaches to city and city designs have actually played. Yeah, and we are primarily going to look. We are going to begin the story from 1848, which is part of the French Revolution in and especially in Paris. And we are going to look at Haussmann and Haussmannization of Paris. Yeah, this term Haussmannization, have you guys heard before? Has anyone heard the term Haussmannization before? Any time in the course of last year's theory of design, did we speak about Haussmann or Haussmannization? Okay, I'm not getting any yes or no. Anyways. Yeah, okay.
Yes, we did.
You did, right? Something you've seen something about or you've heard the term Haussmannization, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So we are going to begin with a little bit of a history and a kind of historical setup, and then we are going to look at some projects that are actually currently on their way, and some projects that have happened in the recent past as well. So that's the idea. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so the lecture I've titled is called Haussmannization and the New Grand Manner. So grand manner refers to an idealized aesthetic style derived from classical art. Okay, the cities of grand manner are cities that are usually planned in a formative way, and I'll give you examples. For example, New Delhi. Yeah, New Delhi is a city which is built in the grand manner. Yeah, or for example, Washington D.C. is built in the grand manner. Yeah, you understand why the term grand manner is referred to here when we think of cities like New Delhi or Washington D.C. because there is a certain kind of stylization that is brought in the architecture of the buildings, and there is a certain kind of a monumentality which is set. Yeah, so that's why they're called cities built in grand manner. Uh, the first part of this lecture, which is on Haussmannization of Paris, I have built it extensively on a book called Paris, Capital of Modernity by David Harvey. And uh, we have to really recognize that this is also in many ways the modernization of older cities, and we'll see how that modernization actually played out in Paris as we go along. But he says a very important thing. He says that one of the myths of modernity is that it constitutes a radical break with the past. Yeah. So this idea that modernity is a break from the past, he calls it a myth. Yeah. He says that the break is supposedly of such an order as to make it possible to see the world as a tabula rasa. Yeah, that the world is a flat plane on which you can build the new, upon which the new can be inscribed without reference to the past, or if the past gets in the way, through its obliteration. Modernity is therefore always about creative destruction, be it of gentle and democratic or the revolutionary, traumatic and authoritarian kind. Yeah. So this presumption that modernity is always about creative destruction, he in fact says is a myth in many ways. Yeah. So this is a famous kind of a drawing by Daumier. It is called the riot, and this is referring to the riots that took place in Paris in 1848. Okay, and I have to give you a little bit of context of what these riots were. Uh, if you have studied history, and especially European history in your school, you must have heard of the French Revolution. French Revolution happens in, I think, between 1780s and 1790s. And it is actually at this point that very clearly the feudal kind of or monarchy is now conclusively sort of moving towards its end. Yeah. As a result of this, what happens is that there is a new way of governance which gets set up. It's called the constitutional monarchy. Yeah. Under this constitutional monarchy, the monarch is holding customary powers, okay, and is basically sort of given the seat that you're still a monarch, okay, but the entire sort of governance of the country is brought under constitutional norms. Yeah, this is also the in many ways the origins of the democratic kind of ideals and things like that. In France, in particular, what happened is that I think Louis the 17th uh, was en was sort of entitled as the constitutional monarch somewhere immediately after the 1790s or around about 1800s. But he died and his brother took over. Yeah, and his brother was not interested in being a constitutional monarch, and he in fact started to play a more authoritarian kind of a role in taking and seizing power from the constitutional systems. And he got in by the 1830s. He clubbed freedom of press. He started clubbing. Started sort of closing in on many of these kind of liberal sort of ideals and liberal institutions that were formed under this constitutional monarch system. Yeah. As a result of which, in 1848, when the workers' associations were also finally getting targeted, a major sort of a riot broke out in Paris. And these are some of the sort of depictions of what happened at the end of this particular riot. Yeah, and as you can see, Paris is a very different place at this time. It is not the city that we see of boulevards. It is not the city of lovely cafes and things like that. Yeah. The, the riot actually took on the streets, and this is Daumier's kind of a caricature cartoon, which says that the nature of this particular incident is of such an order that it plays with this idea of idea of the monarchy, that it is finally coming to an end, and that we are going to take over the entire monarchy. Some of the other sort of uh, photographic images from those times, you can see that as a part of this riot, one of the things that the rioters did is that they barricaded the streets of Paris, preventing the army from entering, and the rioters in fact took control of the city. Yeah. another very important thing has happened by this time, which we must recognize, is that the city is no longer a place where only the rich and the wealthy and closer to the monarch are living. Okay, industrialization has actually brought many people into the cities as their labor. Okay, so the industrialists are the rich and the wealthy, but they are setting up industries within and the peripheries of the cities, and they are getting hundreds and thousands of people from the countryside to come in and work in those industries. So the nature or the mix of the population in the cities have started to change. Okay, so a very important aspect of what got lost in 1848. Right. What clashed on the boulevards in 1848 were two radically different conceptions of modernity. Yeah. The first was a thoroughly bourgeois conception. It was founded on the rock of private property and sought freedoms of speech and of action in the market and the kind of liberty and equality that goes with money power. So there was one idea of modernity, which was actually this idea of, that market is the way in which we can actually constitute most things. The second conception of modernity, far less coherent than the first, was founded on the idea of a social republic, capable of nurturing the population as a whole and dealing with the conditions of impoverishment and degradation in which majority of the French people, both in the countryside and in the cities, live. It was ambivalent about private property and frequently confused over what might be meant by equality, liberty, and community. But it had deep faith in the idea that associated forms of labor and of communal activities would provide an alternative basis for more adequate forms of social relations and standards of provision. Okay, so you see that these are two ideas of modernity. One is a very capitalist idea of modernity, and the second is a very socialist kind of a democratic idea of modernity. Yeah, but in Paris, what happened is both were actually smashed. And in the end, the quest for social republic was smashed on the barricades of June, just as the hopes of the bourgeois version were put on hold. And what is called the Second Empire took control. Yeah, as it turned out, sought a third kind of modernity, which was one which was mixed authoritarianism with an uneasy respect for private property and a market punctuated with periodic attempts to cultivate its populist base. Not very different from what is actually happening in the current kind of democratic democratic situation in many countries today. Yeah, so very clearly that is the nature of change which has taken root in the middle of the 1800s. It is exactly at this point of time that Haussmannization of Paris begins from 1853 to 1870. Yeah. What happened after the riots? Okay, after the riots was that Napoleon III, who third was became the elected representative of the constitutional monarchy. Okay, he was elected by people to come and start taking control of the situation. He was a fairly popular kind of a person as well. And it is during his time that this Haussmannization takes place. So what is this idea of Haussmannization? As you can see on the map over here, between 1848 and 1870, several new roads were inscribed in the existing fabric of Paris. Paris, as you and I'll show you this, Paris was a city of narrow lanes, of intertwining kind of streets. Okay, very much like an older kind of a settlement that has grown along the Seine River, right? What Haussmann and Napoleon did is that they started to carve major roads, okay, with straight lines and axes cutting across the city. Yeah, in many ways, what the grand manner of cities has always wanted. You know, the axis and the kind of obelisk at the end and things like that. Uh, the three lines are indicating the period during which these exercises were done. Okay, on the face of it, this seems natural and obvious that the ruler should make such changes as deemed fit by him or her to execute successful rule over his people. Yeah, the state or monarchy would own all land and would possess the rights to make such changes, right? If we were in a monarchy, the king owns all the land, and then the king can say, okay, I want to build a factory over here. I want to draw a road over there. Okay. Many cities during the Baroque era would add new districts and make similar changes to become princely state capitals. This has happened. Yeah. The ruler would commission the buildings of squares, parks, monumental buildings, celebrating power of the prince and military establishment. Urban land would either belong to the prince or it would be easy to persuade landowners to sell and hence consolidate large parcels of land to make such projects possible. But by 1948, in Paris, two important changes have occurred to cities, especially in cities in Europe. And sorry, the date is wrong. Yeah, it should be 1848. Yeah. One is that industrialization of Europe brings people to cities, increasing their population, like I mentioned earlier. And the second is the formation of liberal states, along with the rise of the middle class. Yeah. This did not mean that all kings and rulers were exiled or eliminated, but they now had to accept levels of constitutional government. Okay, so people had started playing a major role in the decisions of what their cities and neighborhoods should be. Yeah, this is a very important thing that has happened under this constitutional kind of a monarchy. This is also the origins of our democratic principles. Yeah. At the same time, in this process, property has become an invaluable and sacred right. No one can violate it or acquire it against the will of the owner unless a public necessity is legally established and due compensation is made. Yeah. You are no longer a king. You can't just take over. Yeah. You can't, the property doesn't belong to you. Property belongs to the individual property owner. And if you want to take it over, you have to establish legality and you have to give due compensation. Yeah, first you had to elaborately negotiate and compensate for acquiring the new land. And this made city making infinitely more complicated at that time. You know, this required a lot of negotiation. This required a lot of sort of pull and push and pull back and forth, which is what we see in our cities today as well. Secondly, there is a distinction between the state and the municipal jurisdiction. The problems of the city were to be addressed by the municipality. This is a very important thing that has happened by this time. Most cities have actually constituted municipalities. Yeah. So the municipality is now responsible for the changes in the city, not the state. Yeah, very clearly. This is a big step. So the changes that happen in Paris are under the control of the municipality in Paris and not under the government of France. Yeah. So what were some of these problems when Napoleon III took control of Paris? And these were the problems that were identified. There was a problem of circulation. There was a problem of sewage. There's a problem of water supply, navigation of river, use of embankments, markets and food supply, and inner city slums, which were a maze and impossible to police. Yeah, important in the light of the fact that Paris is a city of revolution and barricades. Paris's history was always filled with that. Yeah. Napoleon does is that he puts a very powerful, strong negotiator and in many ways a shrewd power broker in place. Yeah, his name is Haussmann. Okay, and here is a caricature of Haussmann with a kind of a compass and a set square. Okay, imagining like drawing straight lines across the city of Paris. Yeah, very clearly dominating the plan of Paris. So what were some of the changes for circulation? Broader boulevards, connect railway stations with street networks, create main arteries that crisscross the heart of the city. Okay, for water and sewage, create a complete sewage system for the city of Paris. For navigation of river, you rebuild the bridges. For use of embankments, reshape the embankments. Okay, for market and food supply, rebuilt the medieval central market. And I'll show you what that market looks like today. For inner city slums, raise the slums and relocate inhabitants to the periphery of the city. Yeah, these were the changes that were actually done in Paris. Some of these changes are not very different from what we do in our cities today as well. So his project encompassed all aspects of urban planning, both in the center of Paris and in surrounding districts, streets and boulevards, regulations imposed on facades of buildings, public parks, sewers, waterworks, city facilities, and public monuments. Yeah, so it was as though you had now control over the entire city, and or you wanted control over the entire city, and these are all the changes that you wanted to make. Yeah. So what were the changes that he made? This was the center of Paris. In the middle of the Seine River is an island, okay, which is where the Notre Dame chapel is also there. So that was the core or the center of the city, and it had largely remained the same for hundreds of years till 1853. And what was done is to create avenues that cut across this entire center and insert new monuments. Which are the new monuments? There is a commerce center which is inserted. There's a prefecture of police, so a major police kind of a prefecture in the middle, and a huge hotel in the center. Yeah. So you can see in this map how much amount of, you see what is put in the beige over here is all that was actually demolished in order to create these large avenues and these new kind of buildings. Yeah, again, the plans were a reflection of the empire's evolution, fairly authoritarian till 1859 and more flexible after 1860s, because that authoritarian kind of approach started to be met with a lot of resistance, because you were demolishing houses, 20,000 houses, 40,000 to be built on the periphery and things like that. And in many ways, you are affecting the lives of everyone in Paris. So naturally, the resistance was bound to emerge. Yeah. This is another extended kind of a drawing of the same changes that were brought. Okay, but what allowed Haussmann to actually go ahead with these changes? In 1852, a new decree was passed regarding the streets of Paris. Yeah, this is very important. What it says is that expropriation for purpose of public interest. The city could acquire buildings placed along the avenues to be constructed, whereas earlier it could only acquire buildings placed directly on future construction site. Now it is not only the site where construction is happening, but they could acquire buildings along the entire avenue that was to be constructed. This would allow considerable part of, for example, the center of this city to be demolished. That's what I showed you earlier. Okay, those who own buildings were required to clean and refresh the facades every 10 years. So it was then put on building owners to actually, especially on these avenues, to clean and refresh the facades every 10 years. Third is the leveling of streets of Paris. The building alignments and connections to the sewers had to be regulated. Okay, so you wanted to bring in the sewers, and what that meant is that you had to regulate building alignments. Okay, so these were the reasons that were actually allowing for such major changes to happen. And new urban bylaws regarding the height of building, elevation lines, angle of roof, and materials to be used for buildings along with avenues and boulevards were constituted. So 1852 constitutes this very important decree and says that these are the new laws, and now we'll start following these new laws. I'm just showing you the center of Paris. right over here. Okay, and the avenues that are cut through. Yeah, you can see how Paris was earlier, though. You can see the remaining fabric, which is not sliced and chopped around. Okay, but when you look at this is the current kind of view of Paris, you can make out where those lines are. You can see that these are not natural lines that the city grows with. These are not natural lines. They are all lines which have been inscribed into an existing fabric. Yeah, I think in case of Paris, this change is the most dramatic. Yeah, because this Haussmannization project continued for many years. Okay, it ran into a lot of financial problems also, because the country went into debt because of this. Haussmann was fired, made a scapegoat, and asked to retire and things like that. But by that time, within the 30 years, the project was already on its way. So, two fundamental concepts that Haussmann worked with to achieve this massive task. One, the idea of creative destruction. Yeah, this meant that it was imperative to destroy neighborhoods in order to get rid of slums and unhygienic conditions of the city, and that this destruction would in turn give rise to more creative urban formation. Okay, in case of Haussmann, it were the boulevards and the sewers and the bridges, etc. And the other was the idea of productive expenses. And this is something which he often used in while justifying some of the changes that he was making. This meant that the expenditure of huge amounts of public money on parks, boulevards, avenues, bridges, etc., was perfectly justified in creating such architectures, as this would contribute to the common good by enhancing land value for future growth and investments via tourism and private investment, for example. The same rhetoric is used when we were looking at the entire riverfront project in Ahmedabad. Okay, the same rhetoric you will find has been used in many other cases when projects are actually sort of brought on ground. Yeah, I mean, but the change that it made is not only to individual buildings or architecture styles, but a new concept of commercial urbanism. Okay, that amounted to production and engineering of whole quarters of cities given over to a single function. So in many ways, the idea of zoning, the roots of the idea of zoning emerge in this particular case. Just showing you some of the spectacles of demolition at the Boulevard of Sebastopol, for example. Another kind of a street which is undergoing complete demolitions. Again, this is Daumier's rendition, where a workman is telling a bourgeois couple to hurry and get up because they are next in line for the pickaxe. Yeah, so demolitions were affecting everyone, rich and poor. This is a very famous photograph by a early photographer called Marville. You will find many of his other photographs on Paris and other cities that captures the conditions of living in the numerous shanty towns that sprang upon the periphery and the interstices of existing development as demolition took hold in the center. So while demolitions were happening, people were being displaced, shanty towns were being created on the peripheries and in interstices, but also new labor was actually required to be brought into the city. So they are also the people who are actually living in these cities. Yeah. So, for example, these would be the streets of Paris. Maybe there are still some streets of Paris which are quite like these. Again, large-scale demolitions. And what we get is this large avenues, cafes lined with the streets, monuments on the axis. Yeah. There are many sort of painters, writers, and poets that have written about the kind of street life of Paris henceforward. Yeah. But these streets and avenues are not only on the surface. Okay, below the streets were extensive modern kind of ways of moving steam, moving sewers or sewage, moving heat systems, etc., that were now brought into the city. Yeah, so this change brought in a completely different modernization of the city and the street to be used as a mechanical device to sort of move our services it, and you can now understand when you look at, say, for example, the older parts of Bombay as well. These changes actually take forth post 1857, really. Okay, after the after Bombay comes under the jurisdiction of the Queen from the East India Company, similar approaches are seen in civic kind of improvement in Bombay as well. Yeah, the collective use of steam engines became a feature of Parisian industry during this period. So this design illustrates how the system working through a steam engine in the basement and distributing power to several floors above allows for building to be occupied by different businesses. Okay, you could, through the steam kind of engine, give heat to different quarters of the building. So you could create internalized apartments and working conditions, and you could also put mechanical setups within the apartment buildings. Yeah, these are all innovations that are that could then actually come into the city itself. Some of the sewers that were laid below the streets of Paris, and that's the central market. Okay, which was, you can obviously make out that it required raising a substantial part of the city in order to bring in a large kind of a market space for the whole of the city. Yeah, I'm showing you some current images of the avenues and views and the boulevards. Okay, so an interesting critique that Lewis Mumford makes is that he says that another part of the reason why these avenues were made were also to allow for easy military access in case of riots and in case of more kind of violence breaking out, resistances coming from the city. So the boulevards allowed the military to enter safely into, or rather, you couldn't barricade wider streets. It was much more difficult, right? Narrow streets you can barricade easily, the bigger streets you can't, and so on and so forth. But that particular kind of critique has been challenged in the recent past, because later on also Paris has had several such riots uh, uh, and attempts, but research shows that actually it is not necessarily the barricades, but it is just the use of force that breaks some of these riots and things like that. But that's a debate which is ongoing. Yeah, I'm now going to move from, this is the period, this we saw 1848 to around 1870s. We are going to now move exactly 100 years into 1940s. Yeah. If you have any questions, or should we take the questions in the end? Okay. All right. We come to New York. Yeah. And this is a person named Robert Moses. He's also been, what do you say, famously called the power broker. There's a book by the same name. Yeah. What Moses did in New York, say around about from 19, if I'm not wrong, from 1940s to about 1970s again, is he ended up holding 12 official titles simultaneously, including the New York Parks Commissioner, the chairman of Long Island State Park Commission, and many other departments, road networks, etc., etc. He created and led semi-autonomous public authorities through which he controlled millions of dollars in revenue and directly issued bonds to fund new ventures with little or no input or oversight. As a result of Moses' work, New York has has America's greatest proportion of public benefit corporations, which remain primary driver of infrastructure building and maintenance and account for most of the state's debt. Yeah. So Moses is blamed for having destroyed more than a score of neighborhoods by building 13 expressways across New York City and by building large-scale renewal projects with little regard for the urban fabric or human scale. Yeah. So here Moses is standing, and this is a book that came in the, I think in the 1970s as well, called The Power Broker. Yeah, and on the left-hand side, you see the scores of new highways that Moses created across the city of New York. Okay, primarily to allow for east-west connectivity coming from New Jersey going into Long Island side. Yeah, primarily to allow that. Actually he was hell bent on creating these avenues for the car. I'm going to show you one of his projects because that actually created a major destruction in a neighborhood called Bronx. This is Bronx right here, all of this. Okay. In the middle of Bronx, Moses proposed a highway. Okay. It is called the Cross Bronx Highway. Yeah. That cuts across, that takes you from New Jersey and brings you down into Queens County and then further down to Long Island Beach. Okay, but how did he do it? So this is the Cross Bronx Expressway that you see over here. Okay, Moses has also built some of these other. This is the Sheridan Expressway that comes from north and comes all the way down. So this expressway was built before. Okay, and as you can see, since he was the Parks Department commissioner and he was also the in charge of highways and roadways, he simply took over the various parks that were in Brooklyn and he gave those for creating this highway over here. Yeah. And then later on, he proposes a new road, which is called the Cross Bronx Expressway. I'm showing you some close-ups of that Cross Bronx Expressway. Okay, and you can see how the existing fabric has been completely destroyed. You can almost imagine that these would have been the earlier blocks right here. These were connecting roads. Okay, and now you have a deep gorge which is created in the middle of an existing neighborhood. Yeah, this is just a map which is showing the kind of environmental impacts of these highways, especially in Bronx. Okay, so Bronx in today's time is considered as one of those neighborhoods which has less property value. It is largely occupied by black neighborhoods. Okay, considered to be unsafe and so on and so forth. But it was not so in the mid 1950s. Okay, it was actually a fairly mixed neighborhood where many communities were actually living. Okay, but massive scale constructions of this order meant that there was an environmental degradation of those neighborhoods, as is seen over here, which meant that people who could move out of the neighborhood started moving out. Right, we were looking at pictures of Paris. These are pictures of New York 100 years later. Yeah, the entire construction of this highway project went on for around about 30 years. All the 13 highways that were built. So as you can see, that's the Cross Bronx Expressway. That is the valley that it creates, the deep gorge, and splits the entire neighborhood. Later on, Andrew Cuomo has invoked ambitious legacy as he announced 700 million in state financing for the first phase of replacement of Sheridan Expressway in Bronx with a more modest and amenable boulevard, one that no longer cuts adjoining neighborhoods off from Bronx River. So if you remember the Sheridan Boulevard, it runs north to south and it cuts Bronx from the Bronx River. Yeah. And the new ambition is to actually replace that entire large highway with a smaller road. This was another of his ambitious projects, to cut Manhattan with arterial kind of improvements. And this one goes through downtown Manhattan, okay, cutting across from the Jersey side across to the East River and on the other side. Yeah, it's very interesting because if this had happened, Soho would have never happened. Little Italy would have been turned to a pile of bricks. And so many of these important streets in downtown that we consider the kind of a source for entertainment and commerce would not have remained. Yeah, but none of this happened because of it met with relentless community oppositions, and Jane Jacob was at the forefront of this resistance against Robert Moses. Okay, I'm now showing you very quickly some of the similar what do you say, improvement strategies, you want to call it, that have happened in Bombay. This is Bombay. This is the inner city of Bombay. You can, if you can make out, that's the Chowpatty, the beach over here. Okay, and these are the railway lines that you see. This is one railway line, and that's the other railway line. And if you can see these avenues, yeah, these are all streets that were brought into the city after the plague. Yeah, and they were brought in to allow for easy sort of movement of sea breeze into the inner cores of the city, and so on and so forth. How successful were they in bringing in the ventilation which is required for the city? That is debatable. I don't think, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, there haven't been conclusive studies to show this, right? That it actually improved the living conditions in the inner city per se. Yeah, there are no conclusive studies that show that, but nonetheless, this is the kind of restructuring that happened in the inner city of Bombay as well.
Primarily because of the plague that they reacted.
Yeah, post the plague, where narrow streets had become a problem. These were the reactions that came through. Yeah, these are the streets very clearly. You can actually identify these in many cities. There's one in Ahmedabad also. It's called the Relief Road. Okay, I'm just showing you what happens to urban form when avenues get sliced. Okay, you see the triangular kind of buildings in this way are only possible if you have actually brought in a move later on. Like, for example, it starts from here and goes all the way across to the other side of the street. We used to do this walk many years ago. We used to take our urban design students all the way from Malabar Hill down along this entire road all the way to Bhaut Sadaka on the other side. It's quite a fascinating journey. But similar kind of large scale visions continue to shape our city. Yeah, this is a simulation of the new coastal road that will be built. You can see Haji Ali on the left hand side, and you can see the reclamations that will happen over here, and this image of these kind of lines of highways and cars that are just flying all over us. Yeah, it's quite debatable that who this coastal road will actually benefit and so on and so forth. Okay, but nonetheless, in this current political kind of a scenario, we have submitted to this change. But I'm going to show you some other examples, only 2 or 3 more, where large scale changes have actually benefited the locality. This is one in Rabenhof in Vienna. This was actually, this used to be a slum right here of around about 1400 kind of families. And this was built in 1914. Yeah, this was also the time when a lot of improvements were happening across cities in Europe. Vienna took on a different kind of an approach. It chose to do what is called in situ upgradation. We call it in situ upgradation now. I'll show you. It's formally very interesting. What it basically does is it creates a super block. Okay, but within the super block, you are actually sort of creating perimeter housing. Okay, so imagine that the housing is on the street over here, and the rest of it is left vacant. Okay, so it's inverting the figure ground. Yeah, if you understand what I'm saying, it's inverting the figure ground. So in this fabric, the ground was the street. Okay, in this fabric, you can imagine the street is the figure, and the rest of it is now given to the ground. This project is also interesting in many respects because this was a public housing project in order to house these kind of 1,400 families. You should remember that Vienna at that time and continues to remain a fairly socialist kind of uh, republic, and now a socialist democracy in that sense. Yeah, I'm showing you a little bit of close-up perimeter housing that wraps along, creates internal kind of spaces which are largely protected from the car. Yeah, long housing. We have similar examples in Mumbai also. Khusro Bagh in Kolaba is a great example of a perimeter kind of a protection and an internal block. Yeah, with commercial setups on the outer periphery, as you can see here. What is of great interest is that this was not only a public housing project, this was actually a mixed use project. Okay, so while the city is building and relocating these slums into formal housing, the city is also using the opportunity to create public institutions and public functions which are actually brought within this housing itself. So, for example, this was a formal market. Okay, there is a bank, right? There's a post office. Okay, there are other kind of small commerce kind of setups. There is a theater. Okay, there's a theater, there's a chapel. Okay, so all of these are the public functions which are now brought in with this housing. Yeah, so very interesting kind of large scale change, positive large scale change, I would say. Yeah, I'm just showing you what the housing itself looks like. Fairly modest kind of homes. And these are the images of Rabenhof. Okay, the second large scale project that I'm showing, and Sandeep, you know this project very well. It's the Seattle Freeway Park by Lawrence Harplin. Yeah. Again, in Seattle, this project was completed in 1976. Prior to that, Seattle had the same issue of the large kind of a highway being driven in the middle of the city. Okay, and this really in American cities particularly, this really was the challenge, because from the 1930s to the 1970s, America embarked on this large scale kind of automobile driven development, which meant that the priority was given to the freeway. Yeah, and in many cases the freeways were actually quite horrifically running through the fabric of the city. Another case is in Seattle, as you can see. So, of course, Lawrence Harplin, who's Sandeep, he's a landscape architect, right?
Yeah, he's the landscape architect, Lawrence
Yeah.
Hallprin. Yeah.
Halprin, okay, not
Yeah.
Harplin, Halprin, yeah. Lawrence Halprin. His strategy was to actually create a large public space that went over a part of the highway, but it connected the two sides of the city. What did that kind of landscape element look like? These are some of the visuals of that project. So you are actually sitting over the highway, huh? Yeah. The entire park is constructed on top of the highway. It has cascading waterfalls. It has all kinds of public space. There you can see. This is the parkway. Yeah. So in many ways, the attempt was to bring people from one side of the city to the other side in a fairly sort of softer way. You know, of course, the intervention is massive. It's huge. It is also heavy. Yeah. But it wants to create a public space that can actually transcend that entire gorge which is created by the highway. So some more images of the same. This is the Freeway Park. It became a very popular place when it was constructed. Okay, another similar project happened in Boston. Again, in Boston, the highway was actually cutting the entire city of Boston from its waterfront. Yeah, this is the I-93, and this project is called the Big Dig. Okay, I'm not going to read out this. I'll just go to the next stage. Let me tell you what the Big Dig was. So this is the highway. Yeah, that is like cutting, so elevated as well as on ground, right? And now this is what the space looks like. Okay, basically the entire highway is now put underground. Yeah, and you have a public park on top of it. Yeah, this was the situation of the entire kind of highway. It's funny how American cities have now moved away from this image of large scale kind of transportation moving crisscrossing over us, whereas in India we see that as development and that as progress. Yeah, this is during the project, during the Big Dig. You can see the tunnels for the highways have been constructed here. Yeah. You can see the highway emerges in parts and then disappears. Yeah, again, a before and after image of the entire Big Dig project. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I'll stop sharing. Okay. I did not show, Paul, I did not show Dharavi and all these projects right now. I think that is,
Yeah, it's okay.
yeah, it requires a very
Have a
different
discussion on that.
Yeah,
We
it
can
requires a very
discuss.
different discussion. Yeah, meaning where the ambition of the large scale, okay, actually comes down to the ground where it works with people and their requirements on ground. You know, there are very few examples where that has successfully happened, and in many times you will find that there is the approach is there, but the results are not really found. Okay, so that's also quite likely. I thought this was important because many students are now going to look at their neighborhood restructuring, and it's important to recognize that that restructuring will have an impact on ground. But that doesn't mean that you don't imagine restructurings. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please feel free to ask any questions.
Let students react and we can
Yeah.
discuss this.
Sandeep, you want to pick names?
I had a comment actually.
Yeah.
You were showing the reformation of the streets during the plague. We had actually done one research paper in one of the humanities sessions where we read the formation of the Bombay Improvement Trust and everything. And it's interesting, so it is debatable whether, so they had done the widening of the streets in order to get the sea breezes inside, but it is debatable whether the question of housing was really resolved or not. So while a proposition or an idea can cater to one problem, it is also possible that it might not solve another. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting how successfully a problem can be solved and how unsuccessfully you can still not cater to one of the problems. So it's like it's an interesting idea actually.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. It's but it's important for us to recognize what those problems are. Huh? I think I think we have to recognize and we have to bring them to the forefront. That while we are solving this, we are aware that these are the 4 things that are not getting resolved. And only when we do that as a part of the project, that you can think of, okay, now how do we actually work? What are the ways in which we can solve those problems that are actually the problem has been created because of it's an offset problem, right? When you're doing this, you have created an offset. Okay, and how do you deal with the offset now? Yeah, it's very important to recognize that. And I feel that at early stage, if we are able to recognize some of those, then we will be able to develop ways of actually finding solutions to those problems as well. So while the primary problem has been solved, you've created offsets of that primary problem in the process.
Agreed.
The Bombay Improvement Trust, on the other hand, actively also build housing. So it was not only doing infrastructure and sort of improvement, it was also simultaneously finding lands and building housing and things like that. Question is how many in the process of the sort of relocation, how many people actually were relocated into favorable places and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the problem of crowding, whether it was resolved and
The problem of crowding, whether it was, or did it increase crowding?
yeah.
Because you in fact created bigger avenues to allow crowds to come in.
Exactly. Yeah. New problems creating through resolving our problem. So,
What is interesting in Bombay is that the same period, which is actually after 1857 in case of India, largely, we find that a lot of public improvement projects are taken on by cities. In fact, the setting up of municipalities also begins during this time. Yeah. So all your city municipalities are getting constituted. They are responsible for executing projects of civic improvement in the cities. So it is that period when a lot of change is happening in our cities.
And
in many, yeah.
so sorry, wasn't that
Go
the
ahead.
period when there were a lot of epidemics and and
Also,
urban
also.
improvements triggered by epidemics?
Yeah, also. Yeah, so whether it's the plague in Bombay or it's something else somewhere else, many cities many cities in India have actually seen this trajectory of efforts of improvement. This idea that that the city has to be now managed by the city government or whatever the municipality is fundamental, in the kind of large nation organization.
Actually, the municipality of Bombay, if you read the history, was in actually extreme conflict with the BIT. The Bombay Improvement Trust was formed, okay, by actually not so much the municipality, but by the state, because it is very the same story like BMC and the MMRDA. So when the BMC can't do a project, is the MMRDA which comes on with these high projects like metro and all these things. So the same problem was happening with the Bombay Municipal Corporation and the BIT. The BIT was clearly coming from a higher level of government, okay, from the presidency itself, was much more like obviously moneyed also, and it could execute projects overlooking the BMC. The BMC was much more tumhara localized, and so most of so still the same governance problems exist still in our cities, where the local government and the state are always in conflict, and everyone is trying to, because the city becomes the ground where you can actually demonstrate, and that's a space where every power wants to demonstrate their presence and demonstrate that they have been very active. So the same story goes, and the BIT is finally merged. The BIT is finally merged somewhere in the 1926, somewhere after let's say 30 to 40 years of work, they are then merged into the municipality. But the same, what you're talking even about, the whether it's France, whether it's Bombay, the same impulses are there, like the state versus the local, and in fact, I think BIT's work, even BIT's work, which appears to be very good now, appears to be extremely, I think, sensitive now at this point of time, was criticized at that point of time by Patrick Geddes, nobody less than Patrick Geddes, who was saying that these BIT projects are absolutely very insensitive and they need not be done. And even those housemanization of roads and everything, which Patrick Geddes himself demonstrated in other cities, like it should be done in with other methods, not with these type. He called them sanitary engineers. Actually, Patrick Geddes referred to them as the sanitary engineers, and so he had a completely different opinion about it. But I think important to it is this debate and counter debate about cities. So it's a space where lot of theory gets created, lot of material practices get created, and there is always this question of debate, and actually what is the benefit of a certain project and what is finally a loser is something which only time can tell, even the creator cannot.
I didn't show them the project in Seoul, the Changechang project, which used to be a natural kind of a canal, which was then turned into a highway, and which is now turned back into a canal of a different kind. So I mean, there are many examples where there is a recorrection of the mistakes. Recently, if you have read in Nasik, under the smart cities kind of a project, the Nasik Municipal Corporation has in fact removed the concretization of the entire river front, which happened in the 1980s and 90s, where which Paul, if I am not mistaken, that was actually a Charles Correa imagination of the ghats of Nasik. And so recently they have now started to remove concrete from the rivers. Okay, because
they have only removed concrete from the river bed. Okay,
is it?
But what they have not done is not remove the concrete from the
sides,
side areas.
the
In
embankments.
fact, what they have done is, which is horrible. In fact, when you ask them, they say no, to remove the concrete will create pollution. So we are putting stone above it. So
why are they putting stone?
Understand this logic, but that's what they were saying. So recently when I went to Nashik, so they were actually putting stone on above the concrete. Okay.
Why?
Yeah.
How does that help?
Huh?
How does that help, putting stone on
that
concrete?
Helps from stopping the concrete, which if they break the concrete and remove the concrete, will create pollution somewhere else. That is their argument. So let it remain inside the bed.
So the reports that we were reading were not really what was happening on ground.
So they have removed the concrete from the riverbed, from the river के नीचे. पहले तो river के नीचे भी concrete था. तो वहां तक कर पाया. उसके बाद वो जो side areas and everything, okay, what they have concretized, okay, they have not removed them. And it must be so much of pressure from the vehicle lobby, because the vehicle lobby uses the riverbed as their own. They are not even bothered. They crisscross the riverbed, like you don't know what's happening. Also, it's all concrete, so you can do anything on the riverbed. Whenever it's dry, it's not a river which is flowing every time. So whenever the riverbed is dry, so they use it like as if it's their space. So and
Some other observations, questions, students from the students?
लेक्चर मध्ये
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I wanted to. So you were showing the way that these highways that were intended to connect the city sort of tore through neighborhoods and sort of ended up separating it more than connecting it. And I don't know if this is a good example of how, but in Hyderabad, they actually have these ring roads that encircle the city. There's an inner ring road and an outer ring road that's so big you can actually see it from the satellite image. And so you actually, in order to get from point A to point B in the city, it takes a lot of time to go through. So you actually exit the city, take that ring road, and enter the city again. And like it's a massive construction. I'm sure it must have told through other like natural landscapes, but like that's an example of
Yeah.
how that could, yeah.
Yeah. Many many cities that are radial actually have those ring roads. Like Ahmedabad also has a series of ring roads. Okay. So you can take the outer ring road, you can take another outer ring road and go around the city, and but in terms of the sort of ecological damage, it must have been a lot. I know in Hyderabad I've seen the large scale kind of construction that happens to create these highways. In terms of, for example, I know in Ahmedabad, land for these highways was acquired by land pooling, which where the farmlands on which these highways are going were actually pooling their land into this into this kind of an entity. It's under the ORDA, which is Ahmedabad Urban Development Authority, and so they are pooling this land, and with an assurance that once the highway comes, the value of their abutting land to the highway is going to multiply. Okay, so it is done very much as a commercial kind of an entity. Okay, of course it creates radial connectivity also, but the ideal way to actually move in a city would always be not with a car, but with public transit and slower modes of interconnections, unless and until we are seeing that as a major move, we are going to find more radial things that are being built and things like that, I think. For example, in many cities in the West today, there is an active move to curtail the automobiles entering into the city. Like Paris and London have very strict laws on whether you can bring the car into the city. We are still way behind. We are fine.
Singapore too. Congestion charges.
Yeah, serious congestion charges. We are still far behind. We are in fact creating more ways to allow the car to navigate and penetrate.
Yeah, so we were kind of studying how, so as our neighborhood is Kharghar and it's a really planned neighborhood. And so we were looking at the way that Sidco's actually planned Kharghar. I've put an image in the chat of how they sort of look at sort of tearing through the neighborhood and making it this large avenue as like this positive change. And so in our neighborhood they've actually built around the original settlements, so the villages are actually what they've shown in the first image, and they've built around it rather than tearing through it. But like that's also a mode of planning that we've seen in our neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what is, I mean, it's called rationalizing the urban form, you know. I mean, in the conventional sense, it's called, I've rationalized the urban form. Have moved the D in line with the park, with the E and the G, and now a straight road can go through. And it's rationalized with the simple prerogative that the automobile requires that rationalizing, you know. But we've seen extensively that that the idea of that the rational thought springing from that point of view is going to give you this only, you know. But if you imagine the future differently and say that automobiles are no longer there, you know, with the kind of fuel prices that are going, who are we building these roads for, right? Then you have a very different imagination of urban form. Sorry, Nishanti, does that answer some of?
No, yeah, definitely it does. I remember, I don't know if this is really connected, but so the first encounters our batch ever sat for, at least that I ever sat for, was about incremental architecture, and the speaker was kind of talking about how in Indian streets you don't really see corners very naturally. Like wherever there are corners, they tend to be sort of occupied, and then the street tends to sort of wind around them. And that's what we were really thinking about when we were looking at Kharghar. Like the corners aren't really natural, at least for us. I don't know.
But see, in your case, Kharghar now has created this, you know. So you already have rationalized kind of large scale system in place, but it has pockets which are quite dense and quite like village like, right? That's what Kharghar is showing. Okay, the rest of Kharghar is already now rationalized. Now you don't need to further rationalize it. I would think of it like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You to find out ways in which you can bring fluidity in that system. Are there other ways of cross connecting? Are there other ways of navigating that are not limited to the large street? Okay. Any other observations? Yeah. I'll download the attendance. So long. Yeah. Shall we meet in the faculty channel for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. If there are students, if you guys have any other questions, please, you can put them on the chat. Yeah.
And I've also put in some links of similar projects to which Shirish had mentioned, wherein the river, the relationship of the river with the city have been severed because of infrastructural, short-sighted projects, and how they have been restored in the last 2 decades. So maybe in the meanwhile, if you want to kind of refer to them, you can go through them. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Let's meet in the
Thanks.
faculty channel.
Let's meet in the faculty
Yeah.
channel. Yeah.
Sure.
Bye. Thank you
you.
so much. I'm ending the meeting.